Welcome everybody to what will become the first in a series of data leader panel talks. We're going to be talking today around some of the challenges facing those people who are running SAP and considering a modern data stack with Snowflake and Matillion. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. I will be your host today, Dan Harris. I run the Data Leaders Executive Lounge, but have been an active participant in the data market for over 20 years. My role here at Matillion was to help enterprise customers succeed with driving productivity on the data cloud. Joining me today will be the CEO and founder of Snap Analytics, David Rice. Snap Analytics are the premium partner for Matillion and a long-standing partner of Snowflake. Extensive experience over the last 17 years of driving SAP engagements and firmly at the forefront of migrating people to a modern data analytics stack. Also joined by David Rickard, who has had a 20-year history working directly for SAP and spent the last 3 years working with the Office of the CTO at Snowflake. And representing the voice of the customer, we have Pete Williams, the Director of Data at Penguin Random House, a similarly long tenure in the industry, helping business to get value from data. For those of you who are in the UK, you've probably seen Peter on the circuit, who's presented some of the most eloquent talks I've seen in recent years. Let me introduce you to the agenda for today. We're going to have 4 key topic areas, and our panelists will take us through around an hour of some of the challenges that data leaders will face as they run their business on SAP, but the choice they have to make with their approach to modern analytics going forward. We'll do that through the lens of looking at what's driving these changes at a macro level, how the landscape has evolved over the last 10 or so years, and some predictions about where it's going to in the future. With that, some of the options that are available to them with their choices around sticking with SAP, working with SAP and ancillary services, and all of that through the lens of keeping up with demands of the business. We'll conclude the talk today with a perspective from Snowflake, a view from Matillion, and then the concept of moving data up with Snap Analytics. Let's dive into our first topic area. There was a period of time where the answer was SAP, and this is a technology that's been around since the early 70s. What we've seen in recent years, though, is a move from a single monolithic architecture to see more adoption of best of breed. And probably what's been driving that change has been the success of SaaS services with the introduction of Salesforce and then all that followed in that area. The requirements for more functional business tools to be added in addition to a monolithic system, and that's created perhaps a hybrid scenario. Beyond SaaS, though, the migration away from private data centers on-premise to the cloud has further driven that change, and it means that businesses who've traditionally been solely on-premise have now different decisions to make. This is driving momentum towards more advanced data analytics and a drive for businesses to do more of their business with machine learning models and become more AI driven. If we can achieve these things, and this seems to be where the market is heading, we will see more sharing of data between internal departments, externally with partners, and enrichment with third-party services. What I'd like to do is ask the panel what their views are around this evolution. So let me pose a question to, let's start with you, David Rice. What do you think has been the main driver of this adoption to move away from a single monolithic architecture to start adopting best of breed tools? What do you think the main business drivers behind that have been, David?
I think if you look back, I mean, organizations, the sort of Fortune 500, FTSE 100 companies, particularly those global organizations, they didn't have too many choices, right? You've got SAP handled multiple languages, multiple currencies. It was really the leader in that time. And I think when solutions like Salesforce came along and delivered a lot of sort of more innovative solutions, and of course, remember, this was built from the ground up for the cloud. They had a real head start and advantage over some of the sort of more legacy code base, I guess. There wasn't that sort of technical debt almost. And I think, it was able to be much more innovative. And I think, sales and marketing leaders, around the world today almost insist on Salesforce. It is the leader in that space now. And, I think, for me, that's move from monolithic to best of breed. I think function leaders will inevitably end up with the tools that they love and the tools that are delivering the best outcomes for their requirements. So that's my sort of perspective on what's really driven that.
Pete, let me bring you here for the voice of the customer. Has this been your experience running data practices for large enterprises?
I think when I look at this, I don't think people, if I think about the people I serve most, and you brought me in as a voice of the customer, and I'm very much, representing and working to drive the business strategy, through data activation of various forms. The enterprise systems are kind of a given. We've made decisions. SAP is a massive core infrastructure, but when people are looking to make decisions, looking for insight, they're not saying to me, we need to go to SAP and do this. We're saying, I need some transactional data. I need to understand the finance systems. I need to understand what's going on in supply chain or the warehouses. And they're looking for me to bring data to them. They don't care, to a certain degree, how it gets to them. They care that they can get the information they need to make the right decisions. So, the monolithic ERP in the background, as long as something is gathering the information and they can be sure that the information is correct, how it gets to them is not really important. But I think what they have found is that trying to get it directly from SAP is often a challenging situation. The interface can be quite hard to manage for an issue in there frequently, and the ability to combine with other data, which is where the magic of data strategy and data activation really comes from. What's the impact on my sales, on my P&L if I do X elsewhere in the organization, is really hard to do when you're inside only one system. So I think these, the sort of best of breed capability that lets you connect and join up stuff, and then use that combinatorial effect to actually drive much greater insight and intelligence for your organization. That's what the business is asking me for, and I need to find the most effective way to bring that insight to them in a way that's reliable and easy to access. And I find that that's best done somewhere else rather than in the system that generated some of that data in the first place.
Very, very interesting viewpoints, Pete. And I think we'll probably dive into that point around whether we should do this within SAP or do this in different systems. Let me bring in David Rickert at this point. David, you've been on both sides of the fence. You've spent time working for both SAP, and you're now working with Snowflake, one of the most exciting technology companies of recent years. Do you have a view that supports either David's or Peter's, or something contrary?
Yeah, basically, I won't combine the two, but I think really, SAP's been fantastic at the transactional level of interacting between its own systems and then interacting with other transactional systems on the business partner, upstream and downstream on the supply chain of that, but at a transactional level. And now there's the next generation. This trend is instead of sharing iDocs or this discrete amounts of information for transactional sake, these supply chains really need to get into that analytics where they're talking about gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes of data, where they can actually share in a much faster way, master data, attributes, and cold storage, cold chain, these kinds of things, where the data is available. And that's why there's this push of having the data in the cloud and then being able to share that out. I think that's really a huge value add for customers. And that's not just an SAP thing, but it's a fundamental foundation piece that's being constructed now.
Is this creating new opportunities for businesses, or is it creating challenges that they're struggling to overcome? What's the view? Is this a trend and a way that we're evolving that's actually beneficial for businesses?
Do you want me to answer that?
Is there an opportunity without challenge, Dan?
very, very rarely, Pete. Very, very good. But what I'm wondering is, this has happened over this. I'm assuming we all agree, right? Over the last decade or so, we've seen people start to deploy these SaaS solutions for functional business requirements. We spent years before that trying to break down data silos. Almost feels like data is now more siloed than ever.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Dan. I think data does seem to be more siloed than ever. I think we are generating a lot more of it as well, right? So data and analytics is very much at the forefront. Historically, I think operational reporting was very much, as long as we can run our core business operations. I think, the trend over the last 10 years or so has been heavily towards using data for more strategic purposes to really move the needle on your big strategic goals. I think that message has really landed, and people now see the value of that data. So I think bringing all this together becomes even more important, but also having solutions that really empower AI, machine learning. We're seeing things like ChatGPT come to the fore now, ask a question, get an answer. I think having platforms that also service those, the data science community, the data analysts and the business is also becoming really, really important. So, yeah, absolutely. This sort of, I guess, proliferation of SaaS solutions causes some challenges. But I think actually the ability in technologies like Snowflake, to serve all of those user communities provides a tremendous opportunity.
What's the business benefit there? Perhaps on to you, Pete, right? It seems like we're going to go from functional decision making based around what's happening in my busy unit, be it like using Workday for HR or Salesforce for a go-to-market function. Is there an opportunity that comes from combining this to make more strategic decision making by bringing the data source together to get a holistic view across an enterprise?
I think one of the things I talk about quite often is the horizontal view. Most organizations, no matter how advanced and modern you set yourself up as, still have vertical pillars. And people at the top of those pillars tend to be objectived against the things that pillar achieves, which can lead to a kind of a blinkered view, or at least when the pressure comes, a drive on your own personal objectives. And if your objectives are down a single pillar, then you're not really looking at the organizational impact upstream and downstream of where you are. So I think data, I call it the DNA or the golden thread or whatever poetic use case I'm trying to drive at the time, but it's the thing that goes through the entire organization. And I think that's what these sorts of modern systems are allowing to happen more, is rather than making a singular decision that drives a part of the business and hopefully has some positive impacts, you've now got a much greater sense, if you choose to take it, of what's the overall effect of the decision you're taking. And actually, is the impact you're trying to make best driven from inside your pillar, or does it come from an input to your pillar or an output from your pillar? So I think for me, that there's a great, people talk about democratization of data. I think there's a great democracy of decision making that comes from using these sorts of systems and then using them in the sort of, I'm going to use the word combinatorial effect again, because we can suddenly understand impact and consequences, as opposed to I'm doing this and everybody else can pick up the damage that comes from what I'm doing. So I think it's a massive advantage to be able to work like this.
Does that present some challenges for a chief data officer within a business, that it's hard to meet the demands of the central IT function, the BAU, the operations that are running today on an ERP system, and provide that strategic decision making? How do you manage the disconnect between functional units who want to adopt a single SaaS platform with the operational systems and bring that together for the benefit of the business?
Who wants to answer that one? Shall I go? I think there'll always be needs for operational reporting, Dan, and I think those SaaS solutions do that really, really well. And I think there are the big
So I think this comes down to the skills of data leadership. The role of the CDO, the sort of construct of what. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Got a bit of a delay for Pete there. I think he's dropped off. But yeah, I think for me, there'll always be the difference between strategic, analytics, so and the forward-looking aspects of the business. How do we predict what's going to happen, what we should do going forward, and what has happened? And I think within those specific domains, those SaaS solutions, and indeed SAP, offer some really good solutions for that. I think it's when you want to pull all of that data together and connect it that for those big strategic decisions, looking at a single view of customer from when they clicked on that button on the website all the way through to when they actually made a transaction, which may go into SAP, being able to tell that whole story and connect to the dots and influence your strategy going forward. I think that's yeah, that's where I see opportunity.
Thinking about strategy going forward, that's actually a pretty good segue into our next section. I think to understand how the market's going to move, we need to understand perhaps where we've come from. David Rickard, perhaps putting this one to you. You've had the benefit of a long career working with SAP. You're probably best positioned to actually understand what was happening a decade ago, understand perhaps where we are today, and perhaps make some predictions about where we're going for the future. Could you give us a little flavor of your history with SAP and how you've seen things evolve over the last decade?
Yeah, absolutely. Some things have changed radically, and some things that haven't changed at all. If you look back at the, there was a real focus from SAP on the analytics piece. There's a market consolidation back in 2007, 2008, when SAP, they acquired Business Objects, and I think IBM acquired Cognos, and et cetera, et cetera. And so these analytic pieces came in, but then they didn't really capitalize on focusing on the analytics piece. Now they've kind of gone more back to the transactional side. But taking the architectures that we had from 10, 20 years ago is really, resource constrained machines, and you needed to plan out the capacity for the next, what's the capacity growth over the next 4 or 5 years on the hardware. And if you went beyond that, then you're in a world of hurt if you actually had to expand that out. And that's pretty similar to some of these legacy systems that have been put into the cloud, that, yeah, they can provision these more quickly, maybe once a month now on the SAP side, or in a couple hours. But comparing that to native-based cloud architectures today is that, for example, Snowflake, is that you can provision, you can go from 8 CPU cores to thousands in literally seconds, and then back down again. So it's just a completely different architecture. It's a different storage mechanism, a different compute mechanism, and if you look at the whole DevOps piece of it, it's just not the same, and you can't even almost compare these systems on the analytics side. What I see 10 years ahead is there's this technology now where there's no resource constraints of what we have, but what I really see especially on the Snowflake side, is what's happening is that this ability to, since the data is in one sync, is that companies they're already starting this, build out whole ecosystems of interconnectivity. And this is this kind of almost the graphic that you have, is that it becomes really this interwoven network between the systems, which is hugely different from 10 years ago. Sharing is caring.
But Pete, I think you've rejoined us. Is that your experience? Dave just talked us through the last 2 decades really of SAP, and given us a flavour around the importance of sharing data in a modern stack. Have you seen that evolution in the roles that you've worked in?
I think Pete's still delayed. Shall I?
Well, I'd like to say I'm too young to have seen any of this, Dan, and I'm all about AI. But unfortunately, that's not the case. I have seen these problems. I don't think I understand it.
Pete coming back. Shall I share my thoughts while we wait for Pete?
Let's do it, David.
Sure. So yeah, I just echo what David said in terms of the technology, the infinite scalability that we've now got to process massive volumes of data. I think I'm going to say 40% of my time in the early days designing architectures, for scalability, for fault tolerance, backup and recovery, all of these things that we're doing. And bear in mind, we have quite big teams designing these things. A lot of that work has gone away, and it was actually one of the reasons we started Snap, because we were inspired by that. For the first time, I genuinely believed the technology was game changing, and taking away 40% of all of that time and effort, because that was fully managed by Snowflake already, enabled us to really focus on value creation from data. And I think that's absolutely enormous. And I think, often, there's these big teams of architects and delivery folks that sat in a room. That's a huge cost and a huge time drain, but also you can deliver projects much faster now. You haven't got to worry about all of that stuff. So for me, it's the modern cloud stack. It really maximizes the things you don't have to do anymore, and I think that is a real paradigm shift.
It's really interesting to hear those perspectives, David. The opinion I've had from running the Data Leaders Executive Lounge last 5 years is that value is front and center of anybody's data strategy. People talk a lot around machine learning, advanced analytics, AIs in the press every day right now. I think a lot of organizations struggle with some of the basics you've just explained. They struggle to get the data sources connected. They struggle to transform it into a way that actually makes sense. Do you think that most businesses, and I'll open this up to you, David, Rickard, as well, do you think businesses are actually capable of taking advantage of modern analytics, AI, ML with the infrastructure they have today?
It just, there's this huge eye opener when we come into an account and they're like, well, we have our financial stuff and we want to do predictive on that, but we want to enrich it with some weather data, and we want to enrich it with pandemic data with the past couple years before that. And we can show them is like, hey, Snowflake account, and you go to Marketplace, in 3 clicks, you have that data. You're doing a select across the 3, and you have it, and you build it up, and you can, and then you do your analytics or predictive on it. They're like, holy cow, and it's something that, David was saying, like this, getting the data together would take weeks before you get the value add. Here, it's available. A lot of it's free, and you can combine it rather quickly. And then, there's the tools on top of Snowflake. We're also building out the ML side, but, just kind of click and go tools on kind of the predictive and machine learning piece. So it's just become radically simpler. Not only that, right? You have your data scientist who's out there pulling things together and doing that, but actually industrializing it where you can have hundreds, if not thousands of machine learning models that are updated every day, and that are actually driving, your business and retail pricing, things that are getting so much easier to actually use.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think my motivation has been some people are doing that incredibly well, and others are still trying to, what is it that we should do? What's your perspective around the distribution of customer maturity? Are there those organizations who are tech first, who are getting this, versus those who are perhaps more focused on their core business and are not so ready to embrace tech? Is it sort of a natural crossing the chasm moment?
Yeah, it's absolutely that. Snowflake's been is 10 years in now, and I'm 3 years into that. But even 3 years ago, is really the early adopters, and not to be geographical, but it seemed to be more on the U.S. side that these cloud-born companies, Instacart and things like that, really grasped onto this quickly of combining the data. And now we're hitting maturity level where it's the retailers and the CPGs and the telecoms that are looking at that. They know they need to shift into the cloud. This is pressure from the ERP system and even SAP, and they're saying, hey, okay, maybe it's time to modernize our analytics stack. At the same time, we have to modernize the ERP stack. So absolutely a range, but we've definitely seen that second phase of the chasm with the more mature customers that got it right 10, 15 years ago, and now they have to make this big jump, and that's tough. It's tough on their side.
Yeah. Okay. So I definitely share your viewpoint there. Perhaps it's like a challenging question here, and Jan, I'm sure you're in the background here. You correct me if I'm wrong for asking this one. If you were a startup, right, and you've got yourself to pay maybe $1 billion worth of valuation, but you're not at that huge enterprise scale now, would you be looking to build your analytics stack on SAP?
on SAP? Let Jan answer.
If I was a startup, then no, probably not. I would be looking at something that has elastic pricing, for example, so I don't have to make a large investment up front. I think for startups that can be quite important, and give me the flexibility to easily connect to any data source I want to connect to, and scale easily as I grow, and also scale down when I don't need it. And those are the kind of capabilities that SAP is not particularly strong on. So I would be looking for.
It's perhaps the luxury of a late mover advantage, right? The startup has that advantage. The large enterprise with an established marketplace, established customer base, established workplace doesn't have that advantage. So maybe that choice isn't so clear cut for them, which is probably a good segue into our next slide, where we perhaps look at the challenges of getting a modern analytics data stack that allows people to share data, allows to build value from data products, allows you to build AI and ML. But how do you do that when you don't want to throw the baby out of the bathwater and you want to keep it with SAP? Pete, I know you've been on this journey. Thanks for rejoining. I appreciate your Wi-Fi problems. I know you've been on this journey very, very recently. What's your view on these challenges?
Yeah, I think you called them out quite well here. The important part for the organization is efficient decision making. Well-informed people with the right information at their fingertips through channels they can easily access at the time they need to do it. And I find that SAP is a very robust and reliable system for creating and shepherding all of that information inside the organization, but it's not necessarily easy to access and easy to do these things from. And particularly in organizations like mine, where there's a team that's effectively in control of that solution, and they take the security and the RBAC profiles very, very seriously. And if you want to do something quick and creative, it's probably not the place to do it. And it's definitely not the place to do it if you want to combine it with other data sources that you hadn't necessarily considered in advance, which is the whole point of data analytics, is the flexibility to be able to consider things and just experiment. And it's very hard to do that within a platform like this. So my view here is use platforms that are suited for what you're trying to do with them. So if you're trying to create like a giant sandbox, for want of a better word, where you can mix together things, give people easy access, easily connect other tools to, and not scare your security people or your people in charge of the SAP teams to do so, then doing it outside of SAP seems like the right thing to do. So that's what I am creating. My modern data stack that gets my data into Snowflake, my Snowflake system, and then all of the things I connect to Snowflake to allow people to experiment and to understand and try and drive better decision making, is to allow people to consider the financial transactions, the billing transactions, the stock information, etc., that we keep inside SAP, but allow that to be almost like the lag indicator of activities that you could take elsewhere in the company. So, if I find a new channel to customer, if I find a new way of driving margin, I want to see the impact of that on the bottom line, but I don't want to do all of that work inside the enterprise system that's the curator of that information. It's much more successful for me to be able to use machine learning tools, conduct analysis, do more sort of what if scenario planning outside of that platform. So I recognize most of what you've got on the screen here. Especially the no understanding part, if you do decide, and my team have had to go through this very recently, as you said, if you do decide you want to take your SAP information out and create a facsimile of that database to be useful for people and which reconciles properly back to what you've got in that system, understanding the construct of what is a very complicated bespoke system, and of course companies often bespoke it even further for their own use cases rather than adopt and change their processes to use the platform itself. That can be incredibly challenging. So what I find is in every organization I've been in, there's a small subset of people who understand what the SAP system is doing, but the information itself is quite generic because it portrays business activity. So removing that sort of language barrier and bring in the data somewhere where people can access it more easily and take the sort of research activities that they're trying to understand the opportunities for the organization from, it's much easier done outside of the platform. And therefore, finding a way to successfully get that data out in a way that doesn't contravene security processes, doesn't upset your SAP team and the administration that they control over it, but does allow people to get ready, easy access to very granular transactional information, I think is a fundamental challenge for every large-scale organization, whatever ERP system they're using. But it's an important one to undertake if you're going to unlock great value from your data activities.
Thanks, Pete. I think it's a good segue. I was going to inevitably, as a professional services company, focus in on that no understanding piece, right? I think it's really important that you've got those data translators, because the business doesn't care whether it's KN A1 or Kuna or so being able to take that SAP kind of language and those complex, not very user friendly table names and all of that information and translate it into something that is meaningful for a business user is the journey that you need to go on. And I think the other aspect, as well as having that knowledge and expertise, is actually having people that can communicate with those core SAP teams. People can be quite tribal, right? We're an SAP shop, we're an SAP team. Actually, we have to shift to teams that are just enablers of the business, right? We are here to support this business and drive value. How can we join those teams together? How can we communicate more effectively? And how can we bring on the right people or the right partners that can actually help to take us on that journey from complexity, from the political sort of silos within the teams, and actually join the dots and say, actually, look, there is still a place for we still need that expertise in SAP, and that knowledge is still valuable, because I think people are naturally fearful when you start to guide them into something that's a little bit different or a little bit foreign. But actually, we can take you on that journey, and we can help to upskill you in some of these new modern technologies. But also, there's still a real place for this, and here's where it fits. Here's actually where we can get value from some of the new modern cloud stack, things like data sharing that David touched on. Are just very, very difficult to do if you keep your data locked away within that SAP ecosystem.
And I've been through sorry, just if you contribute one comment. I've been through a project over many years where we didn't want to buy a system like SAP because the price tag seemed huge, so we decided to build our own. And I can tell you that's an incredibly complex thing to do, and sometimes facing into using what is one of the best of breed solutions for how to structure your organization, and then dealing with the information that it generates is much easier than trying to recreate the whole thing in the first place. So I totally agree with you. It has value, but horses for courses. Use the right tool to do the right sort of business activity.
Yeah, we're advocating a hybrid approach, and I'm not entirely surprised with the audience we have here. David Rickard, you've been both sides of the fence, right? You've been at SAP, and you probably advocated very strongly in your tenure there. You're now on the other side with Snowflake. Question for you is, do you think SAP, who I'm sure are going to advocate you can do all the analytics within their product portfolio, does it actually allow business to reap the benefits of innovations in the modern data stack? The compute, cost elasticity, integration of machine learning, seamless integration from any data source. Can you actually do that with SAP and what they're proposing in their roadmap?
So, and it's historical, right? And it's really tough to bring technology, 50 years forward and bring their customers across with it. And we're talking about Chasm before that, and it's one of the reasons I moved into the cloud space, especially with Snowflake, is that they're resource constrained architectures and technologies. And just to take an example, the largest SAP BW on HANA system is 120 terabytes compressed, so 1.2 petabytes. BW system. Largest Snowflake customer we have has 40 petabytes. So we're talking 250, 270 times bigger. That much more data that they can mine, that can go into a financial institution, and logging, cybersecurity, all these things that aren't, SAP always look at as a financial systems, and it's really the core of your business. But if you're looking to enrich the data, and as Pete was saying on the sandbox side, is that the Snowflake, it allows you to bring in in a cost-effective manner, not only the SAP data, but the other 80–90% of data that's floating around in your ecosystem and in your company. You know, those log files, those JSONs, those IoT sensor data. You know, and now with, you know, with certain acquisitions and whatnot with the unstructured data, so, you know, PDFs and things like that, and actually being able to, it just makes it that much easier when everything's in one place, and you can mine it and you can throw the compute against it and you can throw that. But on the other hand, you know, I was 10–15 years ago, it was fantastic working for SAP because we were working on, you know, $20 million deals up front for the next, you know, 5 years, this massive capital investment that was needed by these companies. And now Snowflake is kind of tough to transition because, you know, I'm working with the largest CPG on the planet, and the first 3 months when they're testing Snowflake, it didn't cost anything because it's just, they hadn't put any data in, and so no data, you don't pay for anything, and they're just building out the structures that they needed. And so I was spending more on coffee than they were spending on Snowflake. But as they build up, bring the data in, bring the workflows in, then that goes up. But, you know, if they're turning the systems off on the weekend, they don't pay for it. So it was a big shift for me, and it's a big shift in thinking, moving from capital expenses to operational expenses, and then, you know, being more like a utility, like electricity or water, where you turn it on, you turn it off. Sorry if I went too far.
No, it's a great analogy, and viewing data as utility is probably the way that the market is heading. Let's take a look at our final topic before we sort of conclude with some viewpoints from each of our panelists. The experience I think we outlined in the first slide was around this move towards best of breed. So different functional units, start to deploy tools that were easy for them to use, easy to get started with, and solved business problems for them. I don't think that problem's that's going away. You know, we've got over 1,800 products in the SAP portfolio, so it's probably an answer for everybody, but it's complicated to access it. It's difficult to get that clarity, the skills to implement it, the impact on business as usual. Those things are all there, and we discussed those in our previous section. But what is it the business actually wants, right? What is it that the business wants to get from data? And I'll probably come to you first on this one, Pete. You know, if you're a CRO, right, and you want to get information on your sales, you know, do you go to Salesforce or do you go to some other reporting platform? If you're an HR director, do you go to Workday or do you go to some other platform? What's the role of the CDO to try and help appease the demands of the business, yet keep data an integral, holistic part of the business?
I'm going to sound like a broken record here. All of the C-suite and all of the people that report to the C-suite are not really interested in, I mean, they might be semi-interested in the system, but they don't need to be interested in the system. They need to be interested in what it presents them in order to be successful in the organization. So, you know, if you're in sales, you know, I'm not in this sort of organization, but sales leads might be presented through Salesforce if that's what you're using. And to the other points that you're making, Dan. But I think that what's important here is, I'm going to use the phrase again, the combinatorial effect. You know, all of these things are made better by understanding what influences them. You know, the traditional 360 conversation we talk about of views of your customers or your consumers, and the impact that talking to them or activating on leads or opportunities has. And typically, all of that is not in the same system, because the organization has bought many systems to do these things. So I think you can execute in a single track mindset and a single type of operation in a single platform. But I think by doing so, you miss all of the context of the organization and the opportunity that can come somewhere else. And, you know, as some of the others have said, maybe there's a more cost-effective way of doing some of these things as well. If cost is a challenge for the organization and you want to be efficient. So I still firmly believe that the CDO's role is to understand what the C-suite is trying to achieve in each of their pillars and help them understand the best way to do that. Now, sometimes that's around buying a new system, but the CDO isn't really around system buying. But mostly, I think it's around access to information, which is probably captured somewhere else in the organization, in enterprise systems that somebody else is running, or which you're advising you need to purchase in order that you can now generate an information stream so that you can enrich your knowledge and you can start working on something. So, you know, you could go into these things, But I think the effect is better when those things are brought out and mixed together. I think I'm facing this conversation right now, and the way I try and lean into it is, if you're running an operation, do the operational parts within the operational system. So, day-to-day activities, transaction balances, all the sorts of things that you might do to keep something running. But as soon as you want to try and make decision-making, understand the organization, drive insight, I think that's rarely achieved inside an operational system, because the operational system has a single point of view and typically is structured to make that operation run successfully. And you're trying to come out of that and understand where the operation fits in the context of your organization and what else you could mix into a decision-making process. So my view is, you keep the operational work within the operational system, uploading in our instance, your journals into SAP, capturing transactions, producing the P&L. But for all the other things that say, what impact did this thing have on the P&L being stored inside and created within the SAP system, that should all be done outside. So lifting all of that analytics workload, the majority of the reporting information, the insight analytics and ability to use the data elsewhere, outside of the system, and in the middle. It doesn't matter whether it's SAP, Salesforce, whatever sort of enterprise system you've got, it all comes into the middle. And you might have a large data lake or a data warehouse, whatever you want to call it. You might even go mesh if that's what you're interested in. But the important thing is that all of the systems that have got the information are pushing it all into the center, so that people can use that for better insight and decision making across the organization, and not just in the single track of the operational system they're working on.
That's a great summary, Pete. And I think it's really powerful when you have a chief data officer who actually understands what their role is, and to work with all those functional leads, and then gets the executive support from the C-suite to make these things happen. I think an organization that enables that sort of mindset is going to make the best use of data. Pushing that back to you, David Rice, right? SAP projects, notoriously hard to deliver, right? SAP teams don't like the operational impact on business systems. Business users don't like paying for analytics they find hard to work with, or creates little value for them. Are we creating a disconnect between central IT and functional departments? Is there a middle ground that can be found to keep everybody happy, or do we have to make a choice between going from sticking with SAP in its whole, or the hybrid model we've been advocating on this call so far? What's your take?
I think it really depends on your role in the organization, right? But I think certainly from a strategic perspective and from the C-suite, you want to see that very much the connected insights. I know there's been a couple of references to coffee. I think Pete was a virtual barista about 10 minutes ago. He now works for Penguin, I can see. David's mentioned that a client was spending more on coffee. We're working for one of the big coffee chains in the UK. One of their scenarios was, and one of the conversations we had early on was, we're pretty sure that the weather has a big impact on how much we sell. But actually, they weren't using weather data to actually decide how much to order, and this company the wastage is about £4 million a year. Actually, with Snowflake, they can immediately augment weather data that is there with sales data, and then start to understand in detail what is that impact on the weather, how does that influence what we should be ordering for stores going forward, and how can that, that obviously then has an impact on the bottom line, because we waste less, we make sure there's availability. If it's a sunny day, we might sell more iced lattes. And I think being able to have that connected insights is really important. I think, is there a middle ground? I think the key thing is that we are empowering the users with the information they need in a way that they understand. And I think it's all of these systems are great. They also have their own languages, their own terminology, and they're not always that meaningful. And actually, they don't necessarily allow you to have full visibility across the sort of use case that you're and the question that you're asking. So I think ultimately, also again, I'm going to come back to people here. Having people that understand the business, understanding how to model and organize, and describe that data so that it's meaningful and useful, is also really important. So yes, of course, there are use cases from an operational perspective that can be served. But again, sounding like a broken record as well here, Pete. But I think, ultimately bringing all of that together, moving that data up the value chain and connecting it. And ultimately, it's about making it meaningful, right? And I know, Dan, that's something Matillion talk about a lot, is making data useful. And I think that's ultimately, it's how do we make this more useful and deliver more value?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key word there is value, right? Having data in itself is not worth anything. It's turning that data into something which is valuable. Pete, I'm conscious we've got 5 minutes here, and we're gonna close up with a little viewpoint from each of the sponsors for today's event. Is there any sort of closing point that you want to make? Because I know you need to get away.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and sorry for my connectivity problems today, which have impacted my ability to contribute effectively. I hope not too badly. I think I'll never restrain myself to one thing. What I would say here is every organization needs these enterprise systems, and nobody, I don't think, is advocating for the removal of them. The important point for me is to use them where they're effective and not to try and use them for things they're not effective at. So the way I see like the modern data stack, the modern data platform, is finding the niche products or the products that are good at what you're trying to achieve, and then making sure that they all hook together in a way that means the organization can efficiently and flexibly establish how it could best trade and how it could best achieve its business objectives. And I think that typically comes from the ability to put in place the sort of tools we described that allow easy exchange of information between these sorts of systems. I was going to touch on data governance because I think what David was saying there was really important around knowing what the information means. So having a great catalog solution with proper lineage, where you really understand what it is you're putting in front of people, and then really focusing on what I call the 4 R's. And let's see if I get them right. It's the right data at the right time, through the right channel, to the right person. And then if you're getting that right, then hopefully you're making the best decisions the organization can make. And I think that is where the power of analytics, the power of data, the data as a commercial asset really starts to come into its own. So just make sure you back the right horse for the right race. And use the right tools for the right job, and encourage data governance, data literacy, and I think the organizations can be in a good place to make progress there.
Pete, sounds like you're on a great path to the work you're doing at Penguin. It's always a pleasure to have you attend these events. Really value the insights that you bring, your perspectives. I'm sure they'll be valuable to everybody listening into this session. So thank you very much today, Pete. Next time we'll get the Wi-Fi sorted, and yeah. I'll spy the coffee.
Well, thanks, Dan. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks now. Okay, so David, conscious that we didn't bring you into that part of the conversation, love to bring you in now to sort of perhaps bring us home around the Snowflake perspective on this, how we bring data together, and maybe can deliver on some of the points that Pete's articulated.
I just want to bring like a super concrete example, and it's not specifically SAP systems, but it's something that our CIO at Snowflake has built out, and we call it Snow Patrol. And us being able to bring our internal data onto one platform, a Snowflake platform, is that we built out this solution, the software asset management. And so we're bringing, because we have a lot of SAP licenses, Snowflake, and 70-80%, traditionally 70-80% of these licenses aren't used, right? And so what we have is something that goes into the authentic part. We use Okta, DocuSign for the contracts piece, ServiceNow, and Workday. And because we have all this data and Snowflake, we combine that with some machine learning, and we determine, in data like, when was the last time somebody used this? And if they haven't used it for 30, 45 days, they get asked, are you still using this license? Are you still using your Tableau license? Are you still using that? And if they say yes, then they continue to use it. If they don't, then it goes back into the pool. And this is a reduction of cost for us by 25-30% just on our software licenses. I just wanted to give something that's super concrete of what are some of the things that you can do when your data is all in once. And we really see this as that applications like this are being built up over the time. They're starting to be commoditized and brought out through our partner network and whatnot. So that's some of the things, the leveraging of people that say, oh, okay, yeah, I can bring these different things across, and then actually having systems on top of that. and now go, going to the next thing is like, what's the some people may not be familiar with Snowflake. So there's some fundamental differences from the legacy systems that because we have, and you see these little gears here, is that we can load and report on data at the same time. We have, we call these virtual warehouses, and these can be attributed. You can have one of these, you can have hundreds, you can have thousands of these within a Snowflake account. So finance, HR, can be machine learning, can all be working within their own parts. But I guess, the big lines of this is, for example, you can use Matillion to bring in most of the SAP data. It lands in triplicate in Snowflake, so it's super resilient. It's not going to go anywhere. And then as it landed once, we do a lot of statistics on it. It's super important to know that everything's encrypted in flight, at rest. We have full capacity RBAC or role-based access control. And this is just, by default. And some of the things we were talking about capacity planning at the very beginning with Dave is like, what about disaster recovery? What about high availability? All these things are built in standard by default at Snowflake. You don't have to, think I need to turn on the security, or, I need, you need to land your data and you have a security structure around it, and then manage your resources. And it's a huge shift to being able to provide the value add things. Just want a little point out on the right side at the bottom is that if a lot of companies have standardized, and if you have S4, it's embedded this SAP Analytics Cloud. Well, you can use Analytics Cloud. You can push that hit that against Snowflake just for the full circle part. On the left side, data transformation, very much different from previous patterns. Is like you can land your data raw, whether it's JSON, XML, files, and SAP data in Snowflake, and do the transformation afterwards. On the upper right, the ability to, if you have multiple users and multiple queries, is that the system will automatically expand out and bring in more compute processing down. And then probably the last thing is that very different from some of the other cloud solutions that we are on a per second one costing, but also on a per second. You don't spin up and spin down systems. You just attach and detach. So you only pay per second. You're not waiting 15, 20 minutes to spin these things up, and it absolutely scales back down. And I think, yeah, that covers my 1 hour thing in 4 minutes. So.
You're on mute, Dan.
Yeah. Dan's on mute. Yeah.
So yeah, sorry. We went through a whole of lockdown. I think I know by now where the mute button was. But no, David, I was just remarking that's a great summary in a very short space of time. I know, given an hour on this subject, you could continue to talk. Right, the value that's created by Snowflake is phenomenal, and that's a key part of how Matillion goes to market. We go to market very closely with Snowflake. We have over 1,100 shared customers. That they understand the value of elastic compute. They understand the ability to scale up on demand, the ability to only pay for the data that you're actually using. In order to make that effective, you need to find a mechanism to land data into Snowflake, and that's really what Matillion exists to do, to connect to any data source, no matter where it is. We talked in this call around SAP, but very few businesses just only have SAP. You need to get to any data source, whether it's a SaaS platform, it's an on-premise database, it's a cloud data warehouse, whatever it is you need to connect to, you need to find a way to make that available in a holistic way. So the load, transform, sync, and orchestrate is the heart of the data productivity cloud that Matillion runs. The way we've made that compatible with Snowflake, and why Snowflake Ventures chose to invest in Matillion last year, is that we push down those workloads to Snowflake. That it seems illogical to move data twice to create an ETL architecture that sits outside of such a powerful cloud data warehouse. And that transformation should really be done on Snowflake. And Matillion has had that at its core right from the very beginning. And the net result of this, it enables people to use our technology to reach the business value that Pete was articulating. It gets data business ready, whether that's standard reporting for internal analytics, it's reporting on operational systems, or it's building that future for AI, ML use cases and driving data science. That's really at the heart of Matillion and Snowflake, and why our partnership is so strong. Speaking specifically around SAP, we've got another slide on that subject, and I'll bring you, Jan, in here to give us a little bit of a flavour of the different types of method you can connect to SAP with, and how we've been working together on development of the ODP connector to take data from Matillion and land it into Snowflake. Jan.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, so here, when you look at SAP, there are different frameworks and different mechanisms to get the data out. And traditionally, Matillion would use the direct table access or table access through the application layer using the Netweaver query component. There is also an option to use ODATA and set up SAP as an ODATA provider, but SAP's preferred way of data provisioning is the ODP framework. The ODP framework is delivered by SAP, it's looked after by SAP, and it's a subscription framework. So as a third party, you can subscribe to a specific data set and get the deltas in every day, every hour, whatever frequency you need. Matillion has delivered a new extractor that is specifically designed for that ODP framework, and that extractor has now been released as public preview feature in Matillion, and it's going to be it's going to shift the needle on how easy it is to get data out of SAP. Using this ODP extractor will make it a lot easier for customers to get data out quickly, but also in context. So you have, instead of looking at several different technical tables to understand a sales order, you can actually subscribe to a sales order data set, and keeping the data in context will make it so much more valuable for analytics purposes as well.
Well, thank you, Jan. And with the hybrid model we've been talking around, the SAP is going to remain the core operational functional system of a business for the long term. But finding a way to get data into Snowflake using an extraction tool like SAP ODP Extract with Matillion, this is going to make it so much easier for CIOs, CDOs to make the decision to augment what they're doing with SAP and do that on a modern cloud data warehouse or modern data cloud. I think we actually got a quote from you, Jan, which I'm not sure you were expecting. The value of combined data in its whole, the data cloud, is greater than some of its parts. We're now going to coin that as Jan's law, and you are going to be working the title, the SAP Whisperer. So thank you, Jan, for all the work you've done to this part. David, can I ask you to bring us home with the concept of moving data up with Snap Analytics?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So I think I'm going to focus. I think we've talked a lot today about and making things simpler, taking away the things that we don't have to do anymore. And I know Jan obviously there alluded to, the ODP connector makes things easier, right? It acts as a translator. It enables us to bring in meaningful data. And I think what I love about this stack of Matillion, Snowflake, and whatever BI tool you prefer and wish to use, is simplicity, right? I think Matillion, low code, it pushes everything down into Snowflake. I spent half my career trying to get ETL to push down to the database. Matillion does it natively, so it's highly, highly performant. Out of the box, it has predefined connectors. If it doesn't, I can easily create use an API wizard to connect to virtually any source. And I've got a low code drag and drop, so I can do my ingestion of data from SAP and all of my other sources at scale. And then I can also do that transformation using drag and drop transforms, using things like shared jobs, which drive reusability. So it really, so Matillion, driving productivity by making these activities much more simple is a real accelerator and enabler for businesses to focus primarily on how do we get value rather than manage all of this technical stuff. Similarly, we've talked about that with Snowflake, right? So it's an accelerator, and it simplifies, it makes things easier. And I see a lot of the Snowflake guys on LinkedIn have Snowflake, it just works. And that was my initial perception when I saw Snowflake, is this thing really lives up to its promises. So many technologies have failed to do that in the past. And we're driving a lot of success and value. And I think the other area of that simplicity is getting people in the room, partners that know the SAP world, which is very complex and are experienced in that world, and can actually bring you into the new world, who also understand Snowflake, Matillion, and how to take you on that journey, but also how to communicate with that team to articulate the value of this and enable and empower them to use these technologies. So I think simplicity for me is the core theme here. And actually moving data up the value chain, moving data up into the tools and technologies that the data scientists and the data analysts want to be using, and those tools that enable them to do their jobs more effectively, I think is a really, really important mantra for us here at Snap. So
thank you, David. And this is just the start, right? We've talked about today around using Snowflake as a cloud data warehouse. And I know, David, you're going to hate that comment, right? Because you're so much more than a cloud data warehouse. But this is just getting data from SAP, landing into a layer where we can start to do some really clever things out and move that data value up in the way that Dave's just explained. But that's the beginning of it, right? When we're talking to data sharing, data cloud with Snowflake, we open up so much more potential. And I think we should probably do a whole different session just on that topic.
And what I would say is, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So what I'd say is, we can't do this without partners. So, incredibly grateful to Snap Analytics for making this event happen. Both Matillion and Snowflake, very partner-driven organizations. We need competent SI partners who can go there and articulate this and turn all the complexity and all the opportunities into real value for our clients. So we can't do it without you. Thank you, Snap Analytics, for everything you've done and continue to do. What I suggest is anybody who's on this call wants to find out more, join us on the Snap Analytics website, snapanalytics.co.uk. There's going to be a lot of collateral supporting the themes we talked about today, and there's a lot more coming down the pipe as we produce more of these data leader series events. But thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our sponsors. It's been a pleasure working with you all, and I look forward to doing it again soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.